started in just a moment. All right, well, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Alice Dreger. I'm managing editor and senior scholar at Heterodox Academy, and you're joining us today for a conversation with Steve Pinker about the future of free inquiry. I'll introduce Steve in just a moment. Before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about Heterodox Academy and tell you about a few opportunities. Heterodox Academy protects and promotes open inquiry, intellectual diversity, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement in higher education. And so when we have a conversation together, we ask people to follow the HXA way, which is to make your case with evidence, to be intellectually charitable. Let's admit when we don't know something, be intellectually humble, be constructive, and be yourself. Bring your own experiences. And I'm sure Steve's going to be doing that with us today. A few opportunities. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which is an email newsletter. We also have a Substack that I edit and write for. It's called Free the Inquiry, and you can join that. You can also become a member of Heterodox Academy if you're a graduate student, faculty member, or staff member at an institution of higher education. It's free, and we just ask you to participate in our mission. And it's a vital mission at this point in time, as we'll be talking about today. So we hope you'll join us if you haven't already. I also edit for Heterodox Academy, a new intellectual magazine called Inquisitive, and you can find that at inquisitivemag.org. I love the contributions people are providing for Inquisitive, and I just want to note we have an open call for our 5th issue, so check that out if you're interested in writing for us. And then finally, we have our meeting coming up next month in New York. We're hoping you can join us if you haven't already registered, June 23rd to the 25th, on the theme of power, responsibility, and truth. All, again, really intense issues right now. When we decided on the conference theme, we didn't realize how relevant it was all going to be. Okay, we'll get started talking with Steve Pinker, who's Johnston Family Professor of Psychology at Harvard. I just want to say, if I have to introduce Stephen Pinker to you, you've been under a rock for 20 years. He is a leading researcher, fantastic writer, all-around great human being, and really a statesman of science and of knowledge seeking in our world. He is also one of the founders of the Harvard Council on Academic Freedom. He's the author of many great books, The Language Instinct, The Blank Slate, Better Angels of Our Nature, and one of my favorites, The Sense of Style, which is about writing itself. It's a great book on writing. And he's got a new book coming out in September that you can pre-order now called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows: Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life, coming out from Simon & Schuster, but you can go on Amazon now and actually pre-order that book, and we'll drop that link into the chat. So I just want to say, Steve, you're not only really one of the leading lights in terms of academic freedom, you're just one of the nicest people I've ever met who is of your level of renown. And I don't know if you remember when you were in my living room many years ago, you gave a talk at Michigan State University and you came over for a drink afterwards, that my son, who probably would have been about 12 or 13, learned from you that you had started your career as a rat researcher. So he promptly got his pet rat and presented the rat to you. And my husband and I were both kind of cringing. And then
rats. Yes, we got rats.
He proceeded to tell you that we let him live with rats free range who slept and ate with him. And you didn't turn us in to Child Protective Services. And now he's studying to be a scientist. So thank you for all of that.
Maybe that's the key.
Yeah.
Kids play with rats.
Well, you did tell him that you thought that understanding rats was really a great way to understand mammals, including humans. And we kept impressing upon him that you had said that and that he should study the way that his rats were behaving, which he did do. And that was great. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about what it's like to be at Harvard right now with everything that's going on. Massive cuts to funding from the Trump administration, a lot of pressure to allow the government in to oversee what's going on at Harvard. Tell us about what it's like. Talk to us about what's going on and how you see it.
Well, the word being used, especially over at the medical school, is bloodbath, because the Trump administration has clawed back all the grant support, has announced that Harvard is ineligible to get grant support in the future, almost certainly illegally, because the executive branch can't arbitrarily withhold funds that are essentially allocated by Congress, and certainly not without a hearing, an opportunity to reply to specific charges, none of which they've done. Nonetheless, they do write the checks, and until it goes to court, and it's unclear when that will be, probably the first hearing in July. We have a set of plans what to do when you get the letter from NSF that your grant is canceled.
Mm.
Was trying to make up for some of it by borrowing, dipping into its endowment. And although there's a widespread belief that Harvard just has this huge piggy bank that they can smash open, but 80% of the endowment is earmarked for specific purposes, such as I'm the Johnston family professor. The Johnston family gave Harvard some money a few years ago, and the interest pays my salary. So I like to think that they can't just use that to buy a centrifuge. So there's as with the entire nation of Canada, Trump has united inadvertently a fractious entity, namely Harvard faculty, who generally, we generally delight in criticizing the administration and each other, but we are kind of united in this moment of crisis.
I can imagine. And that's a pretty unusual thing because as you may recall, for Galileo's Middle Finger, I had interviewed E.O. Wilson, who had a terrible experience at Harvard at the hands of Gould and Lewontin, and described very much a campus that did not come together over issues of academic freedom necessarily, or the freedom of research and the freedom of teaching. So tell me, does that feel exhilarating in a weird way?
Yes. Oh, and interestingly, the attack on E.O. Wilson by his colleagues, Steve Gould and Richard Lewontin, plus 50 or so Cambridge left-wing academics who
Right.
wrote a manifesto in the New York Review of Books against sociobiology, accusing him of being kind of adjacent to slavery and Nazism. Preposterous charges, but that was really kind of the beginning of what we now call academic cancel culture. That was in, as I recall, 1975.
Yes.
We're talking 50 years ago. And Wilson himself said he was blindsided because in those days, there wasn't the phenomenon of academics ganging up to attack their colleagues on a combination of moralistic and political grounds, some of them quite fanciful, but a shaming mob grown out of sometimes hallucinated associations to the worst political movements. We're familiar with that now, but that's when it began. But I have to say, and I'll give a little kind of preview. I have an article coming out in the New York Times this Friday called
Mm.
Harvard Derangement Syndrome, where
Love it.
despite these well-publicized and awful incidents, and we can go over some of the others. It's just not true that that Harvard is a woke madrasa, a Maoist indoctrination camp.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm Exhibit A. I've been at Harvard for 22 years. I teach intro psych, several hundred students, and I teach them about heretical ideas like sex differences and the evolutionary roots of violence and the heritability of intelligence. And I've been just fine. I have warm relations with every chair and president and dean. I'm not the only one. Excuse me. Um, my colleague Joe Henrik shares the same experience. So there are these incidents that go viral, and it's not clear what suddenly ignites an outrage mob. It does happen, and it happened to Carol Hooven, most famously, probably the last straw that led to the formation of our Council on Academic Freedom.
Mhm.
But by and large, most of us publish stuff, every month, and a lot of it is politically incorrect. I have colleagues who've shown that marriage prevents crime, and that hotspot policing works, that drug legalization has harmful effects, that race has biological reality, that there are genes for educational attainment. So all kinds of heterodox ideas. The majority of them, we just go ahead. We don't ask anyone's permission. No one makes a fuss. But that's kind of most of day-to-day life at Harvard, paired with these occasional outbursts. Now, I don't want to minimize them because just the threat of an outrage mob can have a chilling effect.
Mhm.
So it's not that even if they're rare in number, they're not inconsequential. But still, it is the image that's gotten out there of Harvard as this politically correct monoculture. There are elements of truth to that, but it's exaggerated.
And do you think that's true of other universities too, that they're also being smeared in that way as being nothing but woke echo chambers?
Absolutely. I suspect that other places, especially some of the elite liberal arts colleges, are much worse.
Right.
Just because Harvard is just so big. I mean, we've got 24,000 students, 2,300 faculty, 12 schools, 3 campuses. So you can find just about anything here. And now the statistical distribution is not a representative sample of the population, to put it mildly. But nonetheless, there's a lot of stuff going on around here, including a lot of heterodoxy. Not enough, but a lot.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your assessment that Wilson was subject to sort of the original cancel culture. And for folks who are interested in reading more about that, when he died, Quillette was kind enough to publish the full interview that I did with him about that experience. And so that's at Quillette, and you can read it. He really describes very much like even before cell phones, before social media, having that very experience where people were putting up posters on the trees and the light poles at Harvard, denouncing him as a eugenicist, as a racist, as somebody who should be fired. And he described being incredibly lonely and isolated and not having the support of his colleagues. So I think one of the reasons you helped found the Academic Freedom Council at Harvard was the recognition of how lonely it can be when you go through an experience like Carol Hooven recently did of being wrongly drummed out and trying to help people. So tell us a little bit about why you helped found that group and what it does.
Yeah, so I think Carol Hooven was the who taught for me as my head teaching fellow, who I've had many conversations with, very close to her. Yeah, so she had a best-selling book called Tea about testosterone. Went on a Fox News program and explained that to a biologist, there are two sexes defined by the size of gametes. They're big nutrient-packed gametes. We call them eggs. There are tiny little mobile gametes. We call them sperm. And the variety of the organism that produces the big gametes we call females, and small gametes we call males. That's kind of biologically unexceptionable. But the grad student in her department, who was the DEI officer, circulated an email that she was disappointed and shocked and appalled by the transphobic comments, urged people to stay away from a talk that she was given. It was then amplified by the chair of another department. She was not literally fired, but she found it basically impossible to work. For example, none of the graduate students would agree to be teaching fellows in her large course. And she was a star teacher, won awards, beloved as a teacher. Got very little support from department chairs, deans, provost, president. A couple of us, like Dan Gilbert and myself, offered her private support. But she just felt she couldn't go on, and then she left the university. And so, I mean, a general rule is when it comes to women in science, supposedly one of the great causes of our era, if that comes into conflict with trans ideology, women can go to hell.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's a general law. So anyway, the council are on our website. We see we're dedicated to academic freedom, viewpoint, or intellectual diversity, and civil discourse. So now viewpoint diversity is not something that we can easily implement because it involves who gets hired.
Right.
But we can try to advocate that dissenting voices can get a platform. That speak out against cases of students or faculty being sanctioned for the content of their speech, and also just try to calm everyone down and say your disagreement is okay. You're really allowed to disagree, and it's not a felony. We host events. including, since we are academics after all, just what are or are there permissible bounds on academic freedom and free speech? Of course, there are, and it's been worked out in free speech jurisprudence, First Amendment jurisprudence.
Mhm.
But then academic freedom and free speech aren't identical. What are the
Right.
differences? We write articles, we sign issue statements. We do offer, if someone is threatened, the kind of support that, as you indicated, is important. It feels very lonely when you're under attack, and simply knowing that you've got comrades can be an intellectual boost. A number of activities like that.
So this relates to a question that's come in. Is it possible you're feeling relatively safe from cancel culture in Harvard? It has to do with your prominence and your tenure. How confident are you that young scientists at Harvard are also feeling safe expressing unorthodox views?
I think that is a key question because I can't, I got tenure and well, they can come after everyone. They came after E.O. Wilson, but
Mhm.
he survived. He did okay. Won a couple of Pulitzer Prizes. Of course, death was not an escape for him, since Scientific American trawled through his private correspondence and posthumously accused him of being a racist for writing supportive letters to Philippe Rushton. I sometimes in my emails now have an indication, PS to my biographers after I'm dead. This does not mean that I support, X, Y, and Z.
Good for you. Tell the
Anyway,
historians what they should know later. I appreciate that.
right. Anyway, but going back to your question, yes, this is a central concern, and this is why can't just, it's not about me. I'll do fine. At least I think I'll do fine. But it's the people without tenure. It's the um, not just the assistant professors, but the postdocs, the
Yes.
lecturers, the graduate students, the undergraduates. And one of the things that I'm proudest of in the Council on Academic Freedom is that we have now um, taken under our umbrella a new organization called Harvard Undergraduates for Academic Freedom.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about that.
It's new and it's important for two reasons. One of them is that undergraduates' academic freedom is not the same as professors' academic freedom, and
Right.
sometimes they can come into conflict. Like a professor can say, "It's my academic freedom to forbid my student to write a paper on democracy in Israel because Israel is not a democracy; it's an apartheid state." Now, that is and for many professors, academic freedom it consists of professorial prerogative. A professor can do anything he or she wants. That is not academic freedom, but I think a lot of my colleagues are under that misconception. And so it's important that undergraduates have some mechanism where they can fight back and say that they have a right to express opinions as well. And of course, they're the ultimate powerless people on campus because they can be failed. But also, one of the reasons that it pleases me is that a general problem with academic freedom is that it's kind of has a connotation and there's some reality to it of being kind of like an old guy's campaign or an old gal's campaign. And it is true
Oh,
that
guys. I mean, it skews male in terms of who
well, I
takes
guess it is.
part.
It really
Yeah.
is old guys too.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, and our council does skew old, which is a problem. Now, partly this may, I mean, there are a number of explanations. One of them is that it's we're not scrambling to get tenure, so we have the luxury of spending some time on academic freedom.
Right.
We're more secure, so we don't have to worry about that, that just being on the council will be a career negative. But also, as you noted, Heterodox, I think, has documented this, that there is less support the younger the cohort. Now, this I hope will change, but anyway, it is important to have as the face of academic freedom, not just a bunch of old guys.
That is great news. I mean, it's one of the things we really have to deal with, and I've been thinking a lot about it. How do we engage more women and more young people caring about freedom of speech and academic freedom? Because those are two core tenets of how it is we get better knowledge, how we share knowledge, how we progress as a civilization.
Yeah, and in a couple of decades, we'll be dead. Well, maybe the singularity will happen and we'll be immortal. But barring the singularity, we'll be dead. And and if all of the people who take our place just don't get the concept of academic freedom, then universities themselves will be compromised because they'll just solidify an orthodoxy.
So here's a challenging question that's got a bunch of upvotes. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Although the Trump administration actions are very concerning, I wonder if it's the only thing that might finally get the attention of the monoculture, or will they just circle the wagons?
Yeah, I mean, Harvard, I mean, it is a good question, and it is, a legitimate point that Harvard certainly started to scramble. In anticipation of and in response to the ultimatum, although a number of the reforms were already underway.
Mm.
So and partly thanks to, or we like to think thanks to agitation by our council, such as well before Trump, Harvard adopted a policy of institutional neutrality. So it stopped pontificating about the issues of the day and left that to the students and faculty. They got rid of those inane diversity statements that job applicants had to write to. As I put it, it selects for people who are either woke ideologues or skilled liars.
And now with AI, it's very easy. Yes.
Well, that's how some of my postdocs on the market dealt with it. I mean, the ethics are dubious, but if you get ChatGPT to write your diversity statement, have you not compromised yourself because you yourself didn't write that verbiage?
Right.
They Our dean, Hopi Hoekstra, asked for a report from all the center heads on what the state of viewpoint diversity in their centers and how they're handling it. The campus has a new classroom compact that students are encouraged to voice their opinions, and Chatham House rules apply. There's a intellectual vitality initiative. So there are a number of moves overlapping, but many of them preceding the Trump administration. The thing is that it's kind of like saying, maybe everyone knows the scene in the Godfather in which Luca Brasi holds a gun up to the head of the studio mogul and says, either your signature will be on the contract or your brains will be. And you can say, well, maybe Johnny Fontaine should have been released from his contract. Well, maybe, but it's really not the way you do business for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's a weapon that can then be applied arbitrarily in future administrations. I mean, President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez might have a few things to say about how Hillsdale College and Notre Dame should run their affairs. You just don't want to establish that precedent. Also, there is like the rule of law, and the laws in the United States do not empower the president to do that.
Yes.
There are procedures, and we like to think the rule of law is important, and the particular demands were kind of ludicrous patent infringements on the First Amendment, and open to a possibility of astonishing abuse, such as auditing every department for viewpoint diversity, and if found wanting, a government-approved panel could install a critical mass of viewpoint diverse faculty in each department, which could mean that you have, stop the steal advocates in the history department and anti-vaxxers in the med school. I mean, it's just open to astonishing infringements on academic freedom. So it's not something that I would endorse as a way to get universities to change.
So how do you see a successful path towards increasing viewpoint diversity in universities?
Yeah, so I think there there has to be just a recognition that this is an imperative. There has to be pressure from now I'm going to say something that is going to enrage my faculty colleagues, but alumni and donors should make a fuss. This
Mm.
is the reason that this is itself heretical, certainly heterodox, is that a poll of the Harvard faculty last year said that the main threat to academic freedom was wealthy donors.
Ooh.
Now, they had in mind Bill Ackman in particular, who is sometimes credited with forcing the ouster of Claudine Gay. But the thing is, I mean, with all due respect to my colleagues, it wasn't Bill Ackman that drove Carol Hooven out of Harvard. The threats to academic freedom come from other professors. Anyway, so all this is a way of saying that outside voices as a kind of sanity check, I think, are important, including stakeholders such as our alumni and donors. Now, it's not that you want wealthy people controlling what's said in a university, But when I give money to charity, if the charity veers off the rails and starts supporting things that I have no sympathy with, I'm perfectly entitled to tell the charity, I'm not giving you any money anymore.
Right.
If I give money to an effective altruism charity that combats malaria in Africa, and instead they decide to pay a bunch of physicists to fret about AI turning us into paperclips, I can say, sorry, that isn't the mission that I'm supporting, and I'm giving my money to something else. Also, I think we do have a mechanism in universities underused called visiting committees, where
Mhm.
departments really are audited by both peer academics, but also some people on the board of overseers who are not academics. In practice, those have been kind of subject to regulatory capture. The committees are stocked with stacked with our buddies. They act as our advocates. They go to the dean and they say, psychology is doing great, but they need more graduate student support, more FTEs, buy them a scanner, and so on, which is fine. But they should also be given the mandate of auditing departments for viewpoint diversity and academic freedom.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. That's an interesting idea. As you know, Heterodox Academy originally was founded out of the social sciences and the concern that there was this tremendous disparity in terms of Democrats or left-leaning folks versus right-leaning folks within the social sciences. Do you think it makes sense to do a kind of attempt at specifically addressing that imbalance, particularly in the social sciences where it would seem to matter?
Should we have DEI for conservatives?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Yes. It's and this is something we have debated at length in the Academic Freedom Council. I think yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
I don't think you want to have faculty match the political demographics of the United States, in the same reason that it's unconstitutional to do that with race anymore. But consciously mixing in some conservatives in departments like political science, in social science, a little bit. Often it's not so much the left-right dimension of diversity that's crucial, but even mixing in people from different schools of thought, from
Yes.
different approaches. But it should be, it should be a thing. We should be more aware of it. And in my article, I cite the economist Joan Robinson. Ideology is like breath. You never smell your own.
That's a great quote. Yeah, pathway dependence is something we've been talking about. The problem where folks get into a department and they tend to think alike, and then they hire more people who think like them and more people who think like them, and it becomes a sort of ever narrowed problem. So are you suggesting that that kind of affirmative action approach, loosely understood, should happen at the departmental level, or should the university administration be saying, hey, you got to hire some people who are not on the same political dimension or in different schools of thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it has to be decanal. It has to because for precisely for the reason that departments don't smell their own breath.
Yeah.
Um, and it's particularly a problem in academia because of our criteria of evaluation, namely peer review, peer evaluation, which is basically a bunch of professors conferring prestige on each other. It's been noted that in some fields there are objective benchmarks of success. If the team is losing, you can fire the coach. If the company is in the red, you can fire the CEO. But how do you know when an academic field is failing if it's being evaluated by people in that field, conferring prestige on the best other people in that field with the same approach, maybe going nowhere?
Right.
The reason that it's a hard problem is precisely because there really aren't objective benchmarks of success in most fields, and it does require some expertise. You really don't want viewpoint diversity, meaning that the astronomy department has to hire some astrologers, and the Earth and planetary sciences has to hire some flat earthers, and you
Right.
might have some anti-vaxxers in the public health school. Um, so at the one hand, there has to be quality control, which can only be done by experts. But on the other hand, there have to be at least some thought given to how you mix it up and prevent capture by a self-affirming clique.
Yeah, it does seem like an exciting opportunity. And what you're saying relates to a question we've gotten. What's your perspective on departments, not just professors, but entire centers or departments that engage in propaganda. These centers won't fix themselves. The propaganda is by design.
Yes, no, that is a real problem, and Harvard in particular has 400 centers and programs separate from the departments. And one of the conclusions from our 300-page report on anti-Semitism is that a lot of the problem comes from centers that become kind of backwaters. They're there to be captured, and sometimes you have a kind of second-rate academic who's a lecturer or a preceptor, takes it over and turns it into a factory for his or her political hobby horse. And a lot of this so-called anti-Semitism on campus is really kind of anti-Israel zealotry from three centers that have just become centers for anti-Israel studies,
Mm.
not under very close faculty supervision, but these kind of mid-level that is not professorial supervision, and it called on greater control of these rogue centers by tenure track faculty.
Mm. So also related to tenure track issues, are tenure track faculty members allowed to serve on the Academic Freedom Council? If allowed, what percentage of your members are non-tenure track?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, so any faculty member can serve. Majority of them are tenure track, and well, I should yeah, and with tenure. Although one of the peculiarities of Harvard is the vast majority of our faculty numerically are doctors in Harvard-affiliated hospitals who
Right.
have Harvard faculty appointments. A slightly different track. It's not up or out. They can be assistant professors all their lives. And we do have, I think, outsized representation from the medical school, often people in the hospitals.
Interesting. And that's not just because of the proportionality, but because they're actually concerned with academic freedom issues?
It's a good question. We don't know. If it was a random sample, they would be, 90% of them would be in the hospitals. But no, I think it's some of each. And we don't have good data on whether it's the uh, which schools are the kind of the wokest. There's some that are very woke. The School of Public Health, the Divinity School, the Ed School, and probably less so the business school. And I'm guessing, I'm going out on a limb. I think the dentistry school is not particularly woke, but I could be wrong.
Here's a question. Is there some validity to the claim that professors, predominantly in the hard sciences, who overstated to the extent to which their universities had been taken hostage by woke DEI administrators, do they bear some responsibility for the Trump administration's war against university independence? So were the
Um,
critics of DEI, are the critics of DEI responsible for what's
or by
happening?
kind of empowering. Um, I don't know if it'd be responsible because you don't want to like not criticize them because then the Trump administration could run away with the criticisms and kind of appropriate them. I mean, it is something to be aware of, and I think that's why a lot of the hyperbole against Harvard, I think, really is damaging. And my article coming out in a couple of days is speaking out against some of my colleagues, but it's more often people outside the university who I think have insanely exaggerated the amount of repression on Harvard, feeding the Trump administration with talking points. And it's
Mm.
a more general phenomenon, and I'll bring this up because I think it is a real phenomenon that people who start out as critics of DEI, political correctness, wokeness, social justice warriors, and so on, um, not only, I mean, there's a danger of not only enabling, I think, MAGA extremism, but actually joining MAGA. And I have seen a number of people who are so burned by having been canceled or threatened or frustrated that instead of carving out a defensible philosophy of academic freedom and free inquiry, they say, those are my enemies. They're also the enemies of MAGA, so I'm going to join MAGA. I'll have a lot of comrades there, and the woke social justice warriors are just so odious and despicable that the more they're punished, the better. I think that's a mistake because it leads to a kind of intellectual nihilism, but it also means that the restraints on academic freedom are going to be way worse because as bad as DEI is, they don't have they're not the government.
Yeah.
and government has a lot of power.
The ability to arrest, the ability to control money, regulate so many things, accreditation. Yes.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So it seems like from week to week, the complaint from the Trump administration about Harvard shifts. One week it's anti-Semitism, another week it is DEI stuff, another week it's you have this big endowment. Why don't you just use that? If you had to guess, what is the real thing causing this level of animosity, and how can Harvard respond in a way that's
Yeah.
effective?
I think the real thing is, and I don't want to sound paranoid, but I think there's a lot of evidence for this, that it's just the authoritarians' playbook of trying to cripple independent civil society organizations that can serve as a focus for criticism of the administration and organization and solidarity. Because at the same time, first of all, the intent to attack the university was stated way before any of the specific complaints. And J.D. Vance, during the election, had a speech called "The Universities Are the Enemy." And he had just announced that they want to kind of disempower universities. And it's consistent with other attempts to kneecap civil society organizations such as law firms, nonprofits, um, media, um, political parties. And it is, we've seen this playbook carried out in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia. It's just people who want to consolidate power will go after independent centers of power. And I think that's that really is the root cause, as shown by the fact that first of all, the intent to combat anti-Semitism is patently disingenuous, given that Trump has dined at the White House with Nazi supporters and Holocaust deniers, that his right-hand man, Elon Musk, has platformed anti-Semites like nobody's business on X, that there are a lot of Jewish students who want to go into science, and they're being tremendously harmed, to say nothing of the non-Jewish scientists and students who are being told, your enterprise, your career is going to be snuffed out to foster Jewish interests. Now, that is not good for the Jews. So forget, anti-Semitism is baloney. The viewpoint diversity, given how there's been so much attempt to stifle voices that criticize the Trump administration, their actual commitment to viewpoint diversity is dubious at best. So I think it really is the universities are the enemy. Let's try to bleed them dry.
So how does a university, or how do the universities perhaps together respond to that? I mean, it's a very difficult situation and not one they're experienced in.
Indeed. Well, none of us are experienced with this. I don't want to sound paranoid or alarmist, and I'm often portrayed as the optimist in chief because of my books on the decline of violence and the rise of human well-being. But the United States really hasn't seen this kind of concerted move toward authoritarianism, including the disabling of the judiciary, of law firms, of the press, of sources of opposition within the populace. So I think Harvard was right to fight back in court simply because the law, fortunately, there are guardrails. The founders did set up a democracy with checks and balances, and probably didn't anticipate the current situation adequately enough. But those guardrails are there, and we should try to use them. Perhaps and Harvard became kind of, despite being kind of a pinata in the public eye, everyone loves to hate Harvard, but suddenly Harvard became something of a folk hero by by fighting back, and perhaps serving as a model. And I think this has happened, where maybe law firms and media organizations shouldn't be so quick to capitulate for demands that are patently anti-democratic, unconstitutional. Um, Try to mobilize donors and other simpatico organizations. But I think it genuinely is a crisis, and we've got to be creative in how we can push back.
It is challenging because, you can fight back through the law, but my spouse, who's a dean of a medical school, tells me, they got news that their NIH funding was uncanceled for a particular grant, but there's nobody picking up the phone at the NIH and nobody willing to sign the checks. So in effect, even if you're told your grant is back on, you can't get the money.
No, well, the fact that the way that the administration has infiltrated every part of the government, including parts that they don't have legitimate control over because of the division of powers. But this again is part of the authoritarian playbook, is to exert executive control over the other branches of government, such as the legislatively authorized bodies and the judiciary.
Here's another question about the Academic Freedom Council. Have you had any student complaints to date in regards to infringement on their academic freedom? So students complaining about their academic freedom being impinged upon by a professor. If so, how did this go? How did the council handle it?
Yeah, it's and all this is a comment that hasn't come up yet, but it's often been made, I think, in these circles of Heterodox Academy and others, is that a lot of the problem isn't so much the faculty, but the administrators, the absolutely exploding layer of administrators of all sorts, some of them with the label DEI, but some of them just the deans of student life and the deans of faculty affairs and the deans of this, that, and the other thing. I mean, we've got everyone's a dean now. But so I'll give you an example. The students have a conservative, I mean, not all the students, but a group of the students have a conservative magazine called The Salient. They distribute them in racks, paper copies. Part of the reason is they don't want to have everything online where it could be circulated nationwide and ignite cancellation mobs. And for centuries, student publications have been distributed in a physical form in the residential houses, including the famous Harvard Lampoon, the Harvard Crimson. So they were told by one of we call them deanlets, because they're not it's not like the dean of the faculty, that they couldn't do it because it represents a fire hazard, it's a slip and fall hazard.
Oh, that's precious.
Yeah, which is laughable. They said, okay, fine, we'll hang them we'll put them in bags and we'll hang them on doorknobs so no one can slip and fall. Anyway, they looked for one excuse after another, and they did have a history of students. As soon as the magazines were distributed, other students would carry them away and put them in a dumpster, or deface them.
That's incredible.
Other students. So we did weigh in with the faculty dean to get him to reverse this decision, and we prevailed. They're
Well
allowed to
done.
in the magazine.
By the way, I call them ass deans, short for associate deans.
Very good.
Here's a question about journals. What role do academic journal standards have in reinforcing somewhat ideological perspectives and silencing debate around contentious issues? I have examples from STEM fields here, for example, are the author guidelines from the AAP's flagship journal, Pediatrics. Quote, results related to race and/or ethnicity should be interpreted in the context of racism. ... and histories of exclusion, mistreatment, and exploitation rather than as behaviors or presumed deficits. So you're only allowed to talk about race in particular ways in journal.
It's astonishing, that is, that the actual content of hypotheses is stipulated by the journal. Nature of Human Behavior has a related guideline that nothing that would seem to cast any group into unfavorable light may be published. These are just mind-boggling, and they're really those of us who believe that reality can't be divined by from the armchair, that you actually have to be able to gather data, and they might go one way, they might go the other way. That's kind of why we're doing all this.
That's what science is.
One might think. We should be up there with the pitchforks and torches, saying no, take this down, or just informally boycotting those journals because it's just a travesty. You can't believe anything you read in those journals if that is their policy. That is, that the content of the conclusions is stipulated as a matter of general policy.
Mm. Here's another question. Some of the pressure for adopting DEI in the sciences at universities has come from government funding agencies like NSF and NIH and major accreditation bodies. What do you think about this? And if you disagree with that pressure, how would you recommend mitigating it?
Yeah, it is. I think it is another problem, and it's, ironically, people now are getting their grants canceled because of boilerplate that they put in to satisfy
Exactly.
those very same funding agencies, 6 months ago. So they shouldn't have been there in the first place. They are the basis for. I think it's good that the new administration is putting an end to that kind of stipulation. But what they are doing is kind of brainlessly canceling grants that just have certain words in them. So someone's studying biodiversity, well, that's DEI. And so the grant is being canceled. And it's just clear from the kind of chainsaw approach from Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency that it's just massive mindless destruction.
And a lot of inefficiency, I have to say, talking to researchers who are having to spend enormous amounts of time simply trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Precisely. Yeah. I mean, as it's been said, I mean, the Department of Government Efficiency is kind of like the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't holy nor Roman nor an empire. This isn't a department, and it's not about efficiency.
No, I mean, there's a set of researchers working on transgenic mice who had their work canceled because it was understood as transgender mice, but it was transgenic. I mean, some of it would be funny if we weren't talking about derailing incredibly important studies.
Yeah, precisely. And that is the problem with the tendency of the anti-woke, the politically incorrectness, the intellectual dark web to go full MAGA, is that the damage is far worse. It's just destruction, it's chaos, it's not what we want. And I think I'm giving a talk next in a couple of weeks at a conference in England that a number of people have heard about in University of Buckingham called, I think, anyways, basically a heterodox. I don't know I don't know if you guys have trademarked heterodox.
No, just
If
Heterodox Academy.
okay, if they're allowed to use it, but
Yes.
it's kind of heterodox social science. And the point I'm making is we've got to be thoughtful enough to carve out what we think, the way we think science and scholarship and intellectual life ought to go,
Mm.
and not just rebound from the horrors of DEI, woke, critical, social justice, political correctness, all the way over to MAGA, which is worse. That we've got to be clear as to what we do believe in, not just what we don't believe in, and embrace the enemy of our enemy.
So one of the things we struggle with this all the time, and you're really an expert on this, so I want to ask you this question, is the tribal problem, right? The people are reacting not from those principles, but really constantly sort of regressing towards who do I agree with, who do I like, which team am I on? How do we bust out of that in academia and get people past that kind of ideological tribal behavior?
Yeah, I think that is one of the key questions. A start is to point it out, just so that we're aware of it as a thing. And we do have, we do have mechanisms in academia that are designed to circumvent those problems. I mean, the reason that we have peer review is none of us is a sufficient judge of the quality of our work. We all think our work is great, and so we have to have someone else evaluating it. So that was a recognition, a century ago, or whenever it came in, that of the self-serving biases. But we have to be more aware of that at the group level, that it isn't just individuals, but you can have cliques, you can have tribes, you can have cults, and we need mechanisms that kind of push back against those in the same way that peer review pushes back against the idiosyncratic self-serving biases of an individual.
I think the other thing I think about a lot is that some people are just capable of betraying their tribes and more than other people are capable of it. And I wonder if there's a way to foster that as a virtue, the idea of being able to actually be disloyal as a virtue.
Well, yes, and in theory, that's one of the things that tenure was designed to do,
Yes.
and sometimes it does do that. I got to say, if I didn't have tenure, there's a lot of stuff I probably never would have written. On the other hand, if the process of granting tenure is kind of a gatekeeping function that just keeps out younger people. And that you have to be, I mean, in my case, I was, pretty apolitical at the time I got tenure. So, I kind of maybe got in through stealth, and you don't want that either. So tenure by itself isn't enough, but a greater recognition of, respect for the heterodox, the maverick, not just someone who just is a contrarian on principle, because the opposite of a false statement isn't necessarily a true statement, or the contrary isn't. Um, but but it should be just part of the mores, part of the common understanding that this compromises the quality of what we're doing, this kind of intellectual tribalism.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the solution is, but we should at least recognize that it's a problem.
So if you were advising an undergraduate today, would you advise them to not attempt a career in the sciences in America? Or would you say, no, you got to do it because we need you on the team? What are your thoughts
Yes.
on that?
Well, in my responsibility as an advisor, I can't have them as a, sacrificial, martyr for the
Yeah,
cause, even though as an advocate for science, I really do want free-thinking people to go into the sciences. So, and actually I have been in this situation, with my grad students
right,
and undergraduates.
right.
So I do encourage them to go in if their heart is in it, if they're clear about what they want to do, if they're savvy enough that they won't just shoot off their mouth and make gratuitous enemies. Pick your battles, be in a position to defend what you believe in. Don't lead with your most controversial opinions, at least not until you have a job and you have tenure. There are lots of things you can study. You don't have to start off with the most outrageous. If you do pick one, then know what the arguments are, be able to defend yourself. If you're passionate about it, then by all means, don't give up.
So wait, are you recommending self-censorship?
No, I'm recommending discretion. Don't A lot of people have a number of things they want to study. You got to prioritize them anyway.
Yes.
Why pick the most outrageous for your thesis? How about one of the others that's a little less outrageous, and then when you get tenure, you can turn to the outrageous one.
So what my spouse constantly reminds me that caution is the better part of valor.
Yes, well, and sometimes the expression is just, or discretion. Yeah, is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
and that is true. You don't have to express your opinion about everything, everywhere.
So if you could imagine an ideal university system in terms of teaching and research, what would that look like?
An ideal situation?
Yes, if we could have the perfect situation in America for universities in terms of research and teaching, would that look like infinite tax dollars pouring into the universities? Would it be everyone gets to say whatever they want and there are no consequences? Tell us about what you would love to see as a faculty member in terms of liberating research and liberating teaching to free the inquiry.
Yeah, clearly it can't be that simply because there's an infinite number of ideas, and the vast majority of them are bad. They're ridiculous. And so the challenge, and it's not, I think there's no simple algorithm, is to simultaneously have some amount of quality control. So you're narrowing the space down to the ideas that are worth taking seriously, but you allow all the ideas that are worth taking seriously to be expressible. So there has to be commitments, safeguards for academic freedom and awareness of it, the norms and mores of civil discourse, so that it isn't just competitive, victimhood versus accusations of bigotry. There should just be a norm that's just not the way we do things here.
Mm.
Um, and I think norms of civil discourse, not gratuitously calling people racists and bigots and turfs and so on, should be among the criteria for hiring and tenure and promotion. That we don't want to pollute the academy with people who are just going to disable the whole enterprise.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and probably um, looking at models that are moving in that direction. Certainly, University of Chicago is better than I think the Evergreen State College. I think one suggestion that has been made and even tried is new startups like University of Austin. I think, in principle, I think that could work. I think the University of Austin has fallen victim to the enemy of my enemy
Mm.
mindset. They and I was originally on their board of advisors and withdrew because I didn't like the direction they were taking, namely no direction other than we hate woke.
Right.
You can't have, that is, there is no coherent um, uh, mission statement of what the vision, constructive vision of education would be. Now, maybe they'll change in that direction, but at least at the outset, it was basically unwoke university with a faculty of the canceled. It also had no provision for or respect for or serious thought given to science. And another one of my causes is that an educated person in the 21st century has to be able to think like a scientist, know some of the major findings of science, be scientifically literate. And so the traditional liberal arts, great books type of college is just not going to cut it. There has to be serious thought given to how our students can be scientifically literate. And any startup is going to have to recognize that, which brings up another problem, namely science education flows into hands-on experience in labs.
Yes.
And that's one of the great, that's one of the things that's so great about a modern research university. Our
Yes.
undergraduates are in the labs with us, which is good for them and it's good for us because you actually get, ideas challenged by young people, God
And it
forbid.
was one of the great tragedies of COVID, keeping the kids out of the labs. Yes.
Yeah. So, but that does mean that since science does have to be supported by the federal government, there just isn't enough private money with a long time horizon that basic research needs. But it does mean that universities have to have some sort of compact with the government and the infrastructure of human subjects, protection of animal subjects, confidentiality of patients. I mean, well, that's a whole other conversation. I think you and I probably agree that that's gone way too far.
Mm.
But there has to be some kind of infrastructure, which means it's an inherent problem with startup colleges, another unsolved problem. The fact that it's unsolved doesn't mean that it's unsolvable, but
Right.
it mean that attention has to be given to it.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I'm going to take moderator's prerogative here to ask a question that's something I care about. This person said, Alice has reported as saying truth needs to be given priority over social justice, as Jonathan Haidt has argued, but as this person has argued in a Crimson op-ed, he thinks it's a false dichotomy. He quotes me saying this: science and social justice require each other to be healthy, and that the only basis for progress in social justice is uncompromising truth seeking. So could you comment on how truth and social justice should be understood in relation to each other? What real, if any, conflicts are there? Are they interdependent? So truth and social justice, do we need them both? Is it better to just try to pursue the truth?
The truth has to come first because how do you know what social justice consists of if you don't care about the truth? It could be that one person's conception of social justice is incoherent or leads to terrible consequences or is itself unjustified. How do you know that if you aren't, first of all, committed to the evaluation of ideas? And in fact, a lot of conceptions of social justice, as opposed to justice, I think are indefensible or wrong, such as that in every institution, the uh, ethnic distribution has to match that of the population.
Right.
Means that we've got to make sure that there aren't too many Jews or Asians in various institutions. I think you got to be able to evaluate that, and you can't take it for granted as the founding principle of an institution because it might be wrong, it might be monstrous. So I think truth has to come first.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify when that's a quote from Galileo's middle finger. When I talked about that, I was actually talking about justice, specifically to say that if you don't have a just environment, truth can't be sought. And I think what we're seeing right now with the problem of, for example, Harvard trying to fight through the courts and the challenge of doing that when the courts are being essentially disempowered is that very problem, that if you don't have a system of rational justice, it's very hard for truth seeking to occur. So
Well,
that,
and I agree with that. So that's why I distinguish justice from social justice, which is,
yes,
a freighted term which has different meanings. We got to be able to debate what they are.
for
And
sure.
granted,
Well, we just have a minute left, Steve. Is there anything you wanted to point folks to? Everybody should keep an eye out for your op-ed on Friday in the New York Times for
Friday
derangements in
morning
here.
and in the Sunday paper edition, and I just want to thank you for having me on and thank the Heterodox Academy for everything that it
Oh,
does.
we're thrilled to
We-
have you. I mean, your insights and your experience are just incredibly invaluable, and we're very grateful to you. I just want to also thank Marissa Hart for all of her help in organizing this event. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk with you
Another thing,
again. Yes,
huge shout out just to John Haidt for conceiving this and for
absolutely.
everything that he's done. I think he does not get enough recognition and praise for starting this whole.
Very prescient. Absolutely. No, we're 10 years in, and I think Heterodox Academy is more relevant than ever. I kind of wish it weren't. I wish we had fixed all these
Well,
problems.
the original motto of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education was trying to go out of business for 20 years.
I love that. Hopefully we'll get ourselves out of business in the next 5 years. That's our goal. Thank you again, Steve, so much for being with us.